All right, here we go again. And in between all of this, you're on one meeting into another. So it's good to see y'all again. And Matt, it was good to hear and get on the tail end of what Matt was talking about. And boy, I know it's critical as we continue to keep doing all of our cost and charge and understanding that. And it's just moving it over to self-pay. So it's interesting to see the data as we begin seeing that as well. So I am going to be talking to you guys about executive reporting from the ultimate RCM accountability side. And I think this was something that Kim we went back and forth and kind of as we were putting together the agenda on what would be important. I will tell you, as I've done a lot of consulting, and this was even before I was doing a lot of consulting when I was at Acadian or Lifeguard, people always wanted to know about different levels of reporting and how do we do this. So I'm going to walk you through. Now, this is not comprehensive. I'm going to walk you through 3 different levels of reporting that you need to be considering within your organization. And it's all from the RCM standpoint or the revenue cycle management standpoint. And so this is something that I walk people through and I've been walking organizations through that have some of this, but they want more of a high level. How do I understand and diagnose my RCM? Do I know if it's healthy? Do I know what needs improvement on? And so I'm going to give you a window into that. Now, this is not the all be all, but this will give you an understanding. Some of you may be doing this already. Some of you may not. Some may have something, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through a few pieces of it, give you some ideas. Of course, I didn't include any templates and things like that. There's a lot of more extensive information that I have for you, but I'm just kind of giving a high level, just start giving you kind of an understanding. And well, this will take a little bit longer, and we'll keep it open. And I may pause in between to see if there's questions as I advance to the next section, so you don't have to wait all the way through the process, because that is just my presenting style as well. So let's kind of get right to it. And I'm going to pass through all of this and get right into number 1, why should you be doing this from an RCM perspective? And a lot of people might just check it off and say, you know what, I use a billing agency, I outsource, don't really where they send me some reports, but sometimes, but maybe the reports aren't exactly what you need to see. Because remember, if you're not asking for something, typically what will happen, they will give you what they want you to see. And I'm not saying that that's not necessarily bad, good, wrong, or indifferent, but typically if you don't ask somebody, they typically will want to give you data around what the parameters that they want to see. And then you start diving into, or hey, my cash is decreasing. What's going on here? Well, it's because deductibles are raising. Well, how do you know it's really that and not some inefficient practice on the back end that's really driving the decrease? And so that's usually what I like to talk about here. How do we get at that to make sure that it's environmental? Or is it really something internal that needs to be fixed as well? And so then I'll walk you through what I call executive owner or chief, whoever is leading the organization. What are those basic levels of reporting that I should see at a minimum standard? What should I be looking at? So I'm going to give you a few reports that at a minimum you should be looking at and the reasons why behind it. I'll do the same thing for your billing management side. And then operations does have a touch point into the RCM and the collectability of this. And this is something that I often see is, that's the billing or that's the billing agency's problem. They should work through to get the money. And unfortunately, times are changing. Some of that age-old stance that we used to have as an industry is changing. And so you're beginning to see more and more individuals get within and understand the financial and the accounting side of things. It was great to see that PWW has partnered with the former individual that was here in Colorado, Amy, to put together an accreditation on a financial acumen accreditation for the individual to help with operations to really begin to understand not just the clinical aspects of things, but also maybe understand how the financial side impacts the clinical. And I love, love, love that, because the Catholic Charities mantra is no margin, no mission. And that is exactly true. And if clinicians don't understand that you need a margin in order to continue to invest back in, and we talked about that, and Tim talked about that, and some of the stuff that they were doing in some of his cost models as well. So we do have to have something to reinvest and to do R&D and things like that. I'm going to walk through the importance of that and give you some ideas, if you aren't already looking at that, how that could impact your revenue cycle and increase that or decrease cost. So why is it important is whatever. Of course, everybody has seen Peter Drucker's statement, you can't improve what you don't measure. So if you are not measuring what you want to improve, or you're looking at it and you're not looking at it historically over time, this is a presentation for you to work through that. But this is what I usually keep. And when I'm talking to individuals is we cannot improve anything that we can't track. So if you can't track it right now, a lot of times, well, I don't know how well I'm doing against an industry benchmark. At the minimum, start tracking what you're doing, and have somebody else look at it. Have somebody else drill holes into it. I thought it was a really good exercise that Tim brought up, what he was doing to elicit feedback. This is the most important piece, that data and measurement of something, is that it elicits feedback. Doesn't mean that it's always right, but sometimes we can perfect it, we can tweak it, and then we can create regional KPIs around that. And that is something that we're excited as an industry to be able to start doing. Probably the number one request is, hey, we need KPIs. Now that you're doing so many clients, you guys have regional data that you can measure against everyone else. I know there's a lot of people in the industry doing that. I know in certain other organizations that they're sharing their data and they're beginning to judge each other against it. It's important. This is important work for our industry. It's raising the bar. It's something that the hospitals have the ability to do. These metrics have been developed already for the hospital. There's 23 of them through the Healthcare Financial Managers Association. And so a lot of these things, a lot of us have been looking at how can we tailor and tweak that into something else. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for that, because I think you're going to see over the next several years something morph into that for our industry that will look at EMS from that perspective, from the financial metric spectrum, especially from the RCM side, or the revenue cycle management side, that says, how do we know that we're best in class? How do we know what areas that we need to improve upon? So expect some of that to begin to happen as we work through that. Very similar to the hospitals are. We're a little bit behind, but we are newer as an industry in general, where the hospitals have several years, actually decades ahead of us in some of their financial management processes. So number one is, it's very important. This allows you to measure so you can improve. Very similar to how we do on the clinical side. We've done very well in the industry on that, of creating those type of metrics. We've not done so well on the RCM side, and we're starting to get better about it. So let's kind of talk it through first. I'm going to talk it from kind of the hierarchy, and we're going to go down through 3 different levels of reporting. And so I'm the type of person that I like to compartmentalize things. It makes it easier to explain when you're educating, when you're teaching, when you're coaching, and then trying to bring it down practical to what would make sense for individuals that may not understand how to do this. So I'm going to try to break it down as simple as I can into these 3 different buckets on what you should be looking at. Now, if you're in the room and you're like, well, I'm an executive, but I kind of like that billing management report or that operations management report, I want to look at that too as well. You absolutely can. But I'm just saying, in general, somebody's got to be looking at the forest, somebody's got to get into the trees, and somebody's got to rake the leaves. And if you're doing all 3 of them, you're going to miss out on something. Especially usually what happens is somebody's within the trees raking the leaves, they forget that they got to go up and look at the forest. And so that's where a lot of things begin to see. So it's why I compartmentalize it, because people need to understand what they're looking at in order to impact change, to see a broader picture, in order to be more proactive than reactive. So your biggest gauge, and I can usually tell from an organization, if they're constantly reacting to something in their RCM, it tells me they do not understand how to report and the reporting metrics. It's my key indicator. I don't need much to know of anything else. I can ask a few questions and I can understand very, very quickly a lot about the billing org structure, depending upon how you're managing the process through reacting. Are you responding or are you reacting? And this allows for that. So first of all, what you need to understand as a general purpose, if I'm an executive and I am looking at this, what is my purpose for executive reporting? You are basically wanting to understand the performance of your organization on cost, revenue, and what are you writing off, okay? And I go very granular into some of these because there are some things that you need to get an understanding on. And a lot of times things can get lost in generalities. And so specifics in some of this is going to be very important. So as I walk you through some of these reports, some of you might say, I do that already. I'm probably going to tell you in some areas, you need to get real specific in some areas, because even at the executive level, because this is where I usually see there's a lot of leakage happening, revenue leakage. It's been happening on the hospital side. It's been happening on the physician side. It is definitely happening on the ambulance side. I've seen it. I'm still seeing it as well. And so I'm going to break that down. How do you identify as an executive or a CEO, a chief or whatever, that I've got some revenue leakage that I may need to kind of start asking some questions on? So the first one that I want to talk through is, of course, your aging overview. This is something that most of us look at. If you're not looking at an aging report, there's probably a lot more other issues that you're having within your own organization at this point in time. Hang on one second. Let me minimize that up a little bit. Perfect. And so you should be looking at, number one is your aging report. Typically, usually what I have seen in organizations is some organizations will look at aging over 180 days, and some organizations will look at it over 90 days. Best practices is you should always be looking at over 90 days, and you should be looking at a benchmark that is relative to that number. Now, in the hospital industry, they already have a best practices KPI on what 90 plus is, 180 plus is. It is really technically not applicable to the ambulance industry at this point that I have seen in my 24 years of doing this, and especially really looking at this over the last 13 years and drilling down into what is that sweet spot number that I've been able to ascertain based upon taking the KPIs from the Healthcare Financial Managers Association, see how that could dovetail based upon the average charge that we have. That would be applicable to say, okay, this is a red flag alert. My number that I have come up with that I've been able to substantiate based upon some of those methodologies has been 10%. So if something ages over 10% in the aging category of 90 plus in your general, is going to give me a red flag alert that I need to kind of do another deep dive and start asking some very specific question if I'm an executive or a CEO. Okay. If it's air ambulance, we have actually noted that number to be about 17%. It is increasing, and that's because payers are getting crazier in the air ambulance space. And so it's taking a little longer. I'm about to adjust that number to about 23% just because of the No Surprises Act. Some of the problematic is, when should I be concerned when it gets to that number? But I'm going to leave air to the side right now. Right now, my number is still telling me around 10%. And that's just based upon my own information, the information that I have access to, all the clients that I'm beginning to work with now. I'm beginning to see that based upon movement on what is really healthy, what's giving me alarm or not at this point in time. But this is going to let you look at it by overall. And then you should really drive down into the different payer type categories. Some of you are asking those questions of Matt, of what do they do with TRICARE or veterans or Medicare, Medicaid. That's what we mean by payer type, like Medicare, Medicare HMOs, Medicaid, things like that. Because for instance, if you are at 12% over 90, you're going to want to drive down a little to more into which payer category is causing that problem. You're going to see it really quickly come out. You're also going to see that, oh my goodness, you know what? I got an average of 11%, but I've got one payer category that's only 2%, but I've got insurance that's at 27% over 90. So that is also, and I am a strong proponent of doing aging and granularity of payer type and not just a general overall. Even at the executive level, but at a minimum, you need to be looking at aging, and you need to be looking at it in a 90-day, and you should be trending this every single month. Now, what I like to do is for people to take a static snapshot of where they are on the first of every month. And you would be very, very surprised at what you see. I mean, it is a static snapshot. Yep, I get it and understand that people can go back and rerun aging. Most of your systems will allow you to do that, put what the aging date is. I can tell you all the time, people are moving things, they change things, and the reports are never the same when you do it if you run it on the first of every month. So I'm strongly suggesting that if you do it, you run it at the same time every month and you start recording it, and it's really quickly what you begin to see coming out of that. And I'll stop here. I think I see some chats, but I'll let you guys kind of, as I end each one, I'll do a Q&A real quick. Days to bill, most of you guys probably already do something like this. A lot of times I hear people say, I'm doing same day billing. They run the trip and 5 hours later, the bill is out the door. Okay, I'm gonna clap my hands for you. That's wonderful. Let's go around and tout. Usually what I see on days to bill is typically, in order for it to be a very clean through the process, meaning I am making sure this bill is not going to the patient. I have done some scrubbing, unless you've got the accountability happening on your crew side to really scrub that data or whatever. The larger the entity, it's usually harder to have a same day billing practice unless your cost per claim is high. Typically, the sweet spot is 5 to 7 days. And some people talk about, well, my day sales outstanding will increase. Typically, the only individuals that really care about day sales outstanding are those who have shareholders that it impacts the value of stock or something like that relative to a DSO. So every day that the day sales outstanding increases is going to cause an impact to stock or shareholder value or whatever at that point in time. Other than that, I don't buy it. It sounds really good to go around touting and ringing a bell that my days to bill is increasing and I'm out the day. You should be more focused on how clean is the claim, how am I avoiding sending something to self-pay, and do I have all of the pertinent information available to me at that point in time? And of course, cash flow is an issue, and you should pay attention to cash flow. But if you're paying attention to, and you're at a 24-hour, but you could go to a 3 or 4 day, and it means you're going to get more cash in the door after the end. I've not seen any chief financial officer, any finance director from a city or whatever that is going to sneeze at getting the money in the front versus billing a patient. And at an executive level, you'll want to kind of understand that value. You should be looking at that at least on a monthly basis. Some individuals like to look at it on a weekly. I've never seen looking at it from the week to the month that it really makes that big of an impact. At a minimum, you should be looking at it on a monthly basis on what my days to bill is. Now, I also suggest, though, that you put it into 3 different categories, and I call them a clean claim category, a claim discrepancy category, and think that is stuff that maybe operations didn't send a ticket in. Maybe there was paperwork, there was incomplete medical documentation. They jumped off of a truck, they didn't complete their EPCR, they forgot, supervisor fell down on letting them clock out before they completed their record. It happens. In agencies that say it doesn't happen, usually we'll keep on moving. And then what I call also stuff that you might control the hold. So for instance, some people are now beginning to really more hold for deductibles, because now that the collection agencies are no longer reporting claims to the credit bureau that are under $500. Now people are really saying, I need to start holding for deductibles more. A lot of people at the time do Medicare. So those are whatever, you put those into categories because you control that days to bill at that time. But a clean claim, it should be through your processes within 5 to 7 days. Anything that gets longer than that, I would take a look. You got some inefficiencies happening. If it's same day, you may more than likely you're paying more to get that claim out the door from the cost, so you're increasing your cost relative to that. So I would take a look at that. This is just an area that I usually look at through the process as well. Days sales outstanding is another thing, of course, that goes in tandem with days to bill. Your days to bill is increasing. Guess what's going to be increasing on the back end? Your days sales outstanding. If your days to bill is decreasing or maintaining, or it's stagnant, and your DSO is increasing, then that tells you that there is some type of payer issue happening. Either more stuff is going into private pay, and depending upon that impact that you have and how you turn that around, some people it's 60 days, 90 days, 180, a year. You could see that day sales outstanding expanding, but it does give you a symptom of the healthiness of your AR. I am still seeing on ground ambulance that has been pretty consistent for the last 2 to 3 years, surprisingly enough, even with what is going on right now with the NSA, is DSO on average is looking to be around 50 days, but with a caveat. Depending, if you do not write off your allowance for doubtful accounts, you need to adjust for that. So some people are not doing their allowance for doubtful accounts for a year, some do 6 months. So I'm giving you the caveat of 50 days, depending upon how you do the allowance for doubtful accounts. If you automatically, for your allowance for doubtful accounts for self-pay, if you are writing that off within 6 months, your day will be around 50. If it is anything longer than that, you'll need to adjust that appropriately based upon what your self-pay is doing. Sometimes what I do with individuals or whatever, we'll extract out self-pay to get an internal DSO. That may not be an external DSO that an auditor would look at, or if you bring in Deloitte or whoever else that might be auditing your records, that you have to audit your records, they're going to want you to include all of that. So your DSO could even range in the 70 to 80 number, depending upon how you do that allowance for doubtful accounts. And that might be acceptable. But then you kind of look at your DSO by payer type. That's why it's very important to look by payer type, because oftentimes a DSO will be increase based upon your self-pay volume. But for instance, if you have a DSO of 120 days for Medicare, you got a problem. If you got a DSO with Medicaid that's over 90 days, you got a problem. Now, you might know what your problem is, but you got a problem. Those are the type of things that I'm talking about when you need to get really granular with your DSO. I strongly suggest that you go granular with DSO, because it can hide things. Like you might be okay with the DSO that this is an acceptable range, but one payer could be keeping it acceptable, another one's out of control, and you don't know about it until way down the path. So that is an area that I would look at a minimum, understand and know what your DSO is. But if you're comparing and talking to Sean, I know you're in the room, but if you're talking to Sean says, well, my DSO is this, and you're like, well, how in the world is my DSO this? There are certain caveats that you'll need to ask. So I'm very careful about setting a DSO KPI regionally without the caveats to understand what that should be. Your billing cost per transport, this is one thing that I'm so surprised that a lot of people do not have in general at all. They understand what it is for the cost per transport. What is it taking me? What is my cost per transport for patient? And that's all inclusive of everything. But what they don't understand is, what is it costing me per transport? And a lot of times they're like, well, this is what I'm paying my billing agency. But what you haven't factored in is, okay, is there any prep work that your front-end team has to do before they get it over to the collection agency? That's a cost. And you should be factoring that in as well. So if you're paying, I'm just throwing out a number, 5% of your cash receipts to a billing agency, is there other factors that you're not including in there? Are you having to pay? Do you got separate contractors with the collection agency? What's the work that maybe a supervisor has to do to upload the transports to go somewhere else? Or maybe the IT cost to have the API done. Those type of things you should be factoring in. And if all you're looking at is what the cost, your billing cost is your cost per transport, you definitely have a number that is not realistic. And you should be looking at that on a monthly basis at a minimum. And there's so much other granularity we can go through on that. But for time and sake, I'm just giving you an overview because I don't want to belabor the point here. The next one is revenue per transport that you should be looking at as well. And of course, this is something that typically we do look at already. And I know Tim looking at that because it's obvious, because he was actually inputting that information in what we were discussing earlier. But at a minimum, you should know what your revenue per transport is. You should be trending this at least on a 3-year period. And you should be actually looking at this by payer class as well. not just a general overview of my revenue per transport. I've even seen operational break it down by level of service. That's appropriate as well. It is imperative that you look at it by payer class, because a lot of times people are not realizing my revenue I'm losing, for instance, on the Medicare Advantage. And that is where I'm seeing a lot of people see, oh my God, my Medicare Advantage projects is where I'm really losing money. But overall, it may only look like I'm losing $5 a claim right now, and I just associated it with that more self-pay because my percentages are changing. And when you really look at it, they've lost 15% in the Medicare Advantage, but they might be making it up in some Medicare because their Medicare shifted or their commercial has shifted. So at a minimum, I am strongly suggesting at a CEO, executive, chief level, you are looking at your revenue per transport by payer class. Then you can go granular from there if you want to. A lot of people like to get there and look at their top payers. What is Blue Cross doing for me? What are these others doing for me? And then you can make some different operational decisions on that, and kind of helps you understand where to strategically target stuff. Write-offs is another area that I've generally seen outside of what I've been doing in some of the talks, especially now that I'm doing a lot of consulting for a lot of individuals. And what we're beginning to see on this end is that we do write-offs, but we don't have a procedure to really separate these write-offs out that we really want to be tracking in order to affect change, especially on the executive level. And so there's a lot of people, and I've got a fantastic handout that I might send to you, Kim, to send out to people that kind of gives people thinking on 53 different write-offs that they should probably consider, and why you would want to look at these, and why would you want to monitor them, to get your ideas going and saying, you know what, monitoring this, I can impact change. Because remember what we said about we can't improve what we don't measure. And so a lot of times we lump our write-offs all into certain buckets, and things get lost in those buckets that we can't tease out, or I've got to run a different report that then looks at this report, or I got to do a Power BI or a Tableau, and we get all of this. And so then we get inundated with data, we get inundated with reports, and then it's paralysis analysis. And so that is an area that if you look at it very succinctly, you can tease certain things out by doing certain write-offs, and it will require certain changes as well. And then you can set benchmarks for them, you can reduce them, but typically write-offs fall into 3 different categories. It's controlled write-off, and that is something that the billing office controls. I'm writing it off, think we missed the timely filing of the claim, I'm having to write that off. That is things that we control. We change a behavior, we look at something, we can avoid that. Then there's stuff that we actually monitor from the billing or from the RCM space. And that is because there's an operational procedure regarding it. You know what? We're going to make a decision as a company that if you're a pure self-pay, we're going to give you an automatic 20% discount of our bill charges for all of our self-pay patients. Well, if I want to change that impact, then I would have to make a change. It could be something that we're like, you know, if it's an active duty fire, if it's an active duty police and they have an injury, we have to transport them, and we've got some arrangements made that you might be doing a write-off relative to that. And then you've got contractual arrangements, and that's just the cost of doing business. That's your Medicare contractuals, your Medicaid contractuals. The only way to impact that would be to go out of network with Medicare or out of network with Medicaid. So you break those up into 3 different buckets, and then that way you kind of know, where can I start to impact this? Where can I start to really granularly move in and do that as well? And so, like I told you, these are just giving you some ideas of how to think things through, but as an executive level, at a minimum, you should be looking at your write-offs. How much are we doing? And in these 3, at least these 3 different buckets. And then that will allow you to ask questions of your billing office, your billing vendor, to understand really what are you writing off and how can we make an impact on that. The next report at the executive level that I'm going to strongly suggest that you look at as well is that monthly payer category analysis. And I alluded to that earlier when I was talking about the revenue per transport. And this is really understanding what your volumes are doing. Okay, a lot of times we will look at our level of service volumes from dispatch. What's our ALS doing? What's our BLS doing? And those mixtures are specialty care transports. What are our volumes doing? But what we're not doing is looking at how does the level of service or the volume compare to the payer mix trending as well, because that is also going to impact you in the future. If you're forecasting, can I anticipate that there is going to be a reimbursement trend down the road that I need to factor in? That is what you're really trying to do. What change am I seeing? This is something that a lot of us answer. You can kind of forecast in the future. I know this is coming. I've seen this in the Medicare HMO data for the last 5 years. We've been anticipating this issue. We know automatically that in October, when they're redoing their benefit packages for the Medicare Advantage, that we also look at the top 3 or 4 Medicare Advantage plans that consume the most of the volume in certain cities. Okay, did they change their copay amounts? If they did, I know 3 months into it, I can analyze it by that region, and I can say I'm going to have an impact in my revenue. So I either need to change some things or I need to factor in. I could see $5 to $10 decrease in Medicare reimbursement because the copay went up. I'm going to now be chasing the patient, and my reimbursement from the Advantage comes down. This is how you do it. And this is how you know, and you can begin to forecast in the future versus reacting to something like, oh my God, you're 9 months into 2023 and just realized, my Medicare Advantage shifted. They went from 150 to a 2, and you knew this information now. So now I can go in and figure out what are all the changes today for October of things that are changing for next year. And so I can then begin to forecast what are some of those things. And this is what we're talking about here is some of this stuff is not surprising. We kind of know it's coming. We just don't know where to go look for it. And so hopefully this is giving you a bit of information. I'm going to stop here. And Kim, I'm going to see if anybody has any question before I move on into the billing management report, because I know there's probably a lot of executives in the room that may have some questions, and I don't want to move into some, because I'm going to go a little bit more granular into what your billing team should be looking at.
I see no questions online. Are there any questions in the room? I'd say just keep moving, Asbel.
All righty. Hopefully you're not falling asleep on me. I'm between you and happy hour. Promise to get you out of here early. So let's talk about the purpose of billing and when it goes to the granular level. So we talked about executive reporting. Now we're going to move down to the next layer. What should your billing office be looking at in order to impact productivity, claims management that impact your ultimate days to bill, your day sales outstanding, all the aging we're talking about. The payer analysis, all that other kind of stuff, that's just for you to do forecasting to understand what's coming. But there's a lot of things that your billing office should be doing that is going to impact those buttons to tell you how healthy is my AR and when should I be concerned that I've got an issue with my billing agency, or I've got an issue happening in my billing office that I might need to do some digging on as well. So I'm going to walk you through. I'm not going to go too granular into it, but I'll give you this. This presentation will be available to you that they can email out to you with all this information as well through the process. First of all is your timely filing limits, or your filing time limits. Most insurance carriers, if you're out of network, have a 365, but a lot of Medicaid do not. I don't know all the specific payers in the state of Colorado. I didn't go and look at it, but most of you are going to know what those timely filing limits at a minimum. They should be micromanaging these. This is a very easy way to do it. A lot of people have daily dash reports and dashboards that are looking at this from the data service that you're looking at, that you can tell pretty quickly, why do I have stuff that's not paid, that's hitting timely filing? These are very, very easy reports. And this should be something that is daily being looked at in a dashboard by your billing office, by your billing team, things like that. And that's dramatically going to impact your write-off. What I usually see has happened before, I'm not saying everybody's done this, but oftentimes a write-off may not go to timely filings. So let's talk about Medicaid. They might bill Medicaid. Medicaid decides not to pay for it, and they put it in a general Medicaid write-off, and so it gets hidden. And while I'm saying they shouldn't be doing this, a lot of times this is where you will see this happen. And so only having few people that can do certain write-offs is very key to making sure people are accurately reporting and not trying to hide write-offs or mistakes. Denials management is another thing that your team should be working on. I do find this very interesting that as I've done a lot of consulting, that oftentimes denials are not put in appropriately. So people don't even know when you run a report, it doesn't look like they have many denials. They come to find out the frontline team aren't recording the denials appropriately. They might be putting in a billing note regarding it, and it's a free form. Well, you can't report on that. It's like your clinicians out there, you want them to actually document their interventions and not put them in a narrative, because then you can't run reports off of that. You can't see something. This is often what I see in denials management. It is not a true accurate picture of what is being denied because it's being hidden or in a free form because they're not using. So just as like on an EPCR, and you can actually record your intervention so it can be reported on, the same thing happens in a billing system to where every denial can be recorded so it can be reported on. And then there can be looked to see what behaviors from payers are doing things. If all of a sudden I'm getting a lot of records requests on one payer, we're seeing that right now, where a lot of people are under what we call UPIC audits. They're under program integrity audits and they have no clue they were under it because it's being disguised and it's a lot of medical records that are being asked for. So this is an area where it probably needs to be refined. If you ask for a denials management report and there's very few denials, I can almost guarantee you they're not accurately reporting denials in the right way. This is something that the billing team should be looking at. Of course, daily productivity versus goals. This is something that absolutely they should be doing. So if you're not monitoring your people, if you're not measuring them, then of course there's no accountability. This is simple. At a minimum, they should be doing this. You should also be doing a cash reconciliation. This is normally happening, but it should be in a formal process. Usually I do see this happening. The one thing that I do see that people do not pay attention to is their unapplied cash. So a lot of people are on daily reconciliation that you need to post what comes in that day, and what they don't get to, they put it in an unapplied or an unidentified area. Then they forget to go back and work it. And that's usually typically where I see an issue. Usually I see that there is a reconciliation process. Oftentimes it's an unapplied cash issue. The other thing that is another thing that they should be looking at is what's the average time it takes to resolve a claim by payer. This is similar to the DSO report that it's going to look at from that claims resolution. So it's a very similar process, but it's going to look at it and you can actually drill it down to the payer level, down to the actual different payer as well. There are some that you can actually get granular down into it by the actual representative or your actually individual. So if you're wanting to measure them, have quantity, quality goals. At a minimum though, you should be looking at your average claim resolution. That's typically almost synonymous with your DSO report. It just goes into a little bit more granularity for you. In a billing office, they're going to submit claims. This is one area where you will find an issue pretty quickly, is in a daily claim submissions report. And usually you should look at this by what is being sent electronically and what is being sent manually, even if you're using a clearinghouse to do everything. You should want to look at this report. Now, if you're using a clearinghouse, they usually have some very robust reporting, depending upon who you're using, that actually can give you a lot of reports specific around this. Most of the times I see that people are not using it, or they're just looking to see if the claims were accepted. Great, I'm done with it, but they don't really look and see how many were first rejecting. They'll go and fix it, and they're not looking at the trends that are available to them in that report. This will give you lots of insight into what's going on if you're trying to find a symptom of a problem. Collection agency reports. I found it interesting that there was a few questions to Matt on the recoveries that they were doing. It's obvious that Matt is reading his collection reports because he could give you the number. That is why you want to look at that. And then you want to compare them. I'm a big comparative person, so I don't like just going with one agency. I like to compare them. How do I know they're doing the best? Usually a comparative will be that, or if you're a small enough agency, talking to some of your agencies around you or through your association or through RETAC, whatever might be something to kind of see what is the general that you're seeing here. Typically, what I like is if the more the collection agency is collecting, that is an indicator that my in-house isn't working, or my billing agent or my billing agency I'm using isn't working. So typically the number should be really low. What I call a net back number would be appropriate, because the more they collect, that just is a really key indicator that you're leaving money on the table, and typically you're paying a larger percentage to a collection agency. Here's some other ways to kind of understand and see, and this is something that I was really big on in the billing piece of it as well, is insurance obtained after billing entry. So if the billing team did everything and then it was obtained later on down the road, that gave me a key indicator that maybe my verification processes were broken, something was happening somewhere, and why. It gave me some optics into it from a quality score. So you that are looking to understand what's quality work, there are some different nuances that you can do by using current processes to actually get to a quality score without, maybe if you don't have the resources to do like actual auditing. There's also the average revenue in cash by payer category. That's very important for them to know about payer category. It's very similar to what you'd be sharing with the executive team as well. And I'm working quickly through here because I'm going to have you guys. I'm on 5 o'clock your time, and you guys are behind me, so we're good. Any questions at this end? I don't see any in the chat. I'm going to keep on moving into operations management reporting. I'm going to spend a little time here because I know this is probably where more of my audience is as well, to understanding how does operations really impact the reporting piece of this. So the purpose of operation reporting, and this is just I'm just giving you some baseline reports. You can add a ton more to this. And I see different agencies based upon the pain point in the billing office or what they're trying to achieve. It might differ a few here and there as we work through that process. So if you're a large interfacility, you might be looking at a few different elements. I'm working with another company already on certain operational reports that can be ran that might differ from this. But as a general baseline, this is going to apply to almost every agency, and how operations can be involved in the process that if they don't measure this, it's negatively impacting the AR and the billing process. The first is if you are if you're doing any type of non-emergency work, and if it's a Medicare, Medicaid, or you're doing Advantage, you are going to need some type of physician certification statement or some type of required form, or it could be related to, and I'm just saying lack of a PCS, but it could be every transport requires a signature in order to bill Medicare. And this is typically what I see a lot of, and then people are not reporting on it, or they're notifying somebody by an email that, you know what, we've got 500 signatures that weren't received this month for emergency transports, and nobody got anything on them. And so we're having to actually send something to get the signature from the patient in order to bill Medicare or order to bill Medicaid or whatever it is. And we're not monitoring that. We're not letting them know. There is not a percentage of these forms that are going out. And so we do 1,000 transports a month, but 25% of them didn't have a signature. So I'm now chasing 25 signatures. The patient's got insurance, but I can't bill it because I don't have the information. This is feedback directly that's operational related. Most of you guys have an EPCR. Most of you have something where they've got direct access to the patient, unless they're having a heart attack or a stroke or something, which we know based upon the NMSIS data is the small percentage of the calls that come through the 911 system. So technically, the majority of all EPCR stuff should have this stuff. And if they're not, it's just because there is not the feedback going back to the crew. There's not that information. And this is where operations can have reporting that goes back to them. And you guys come up with, this is an acceptable KPI. I want to see at a minimum 90% of everything comes in correctly the first time, and you would set a KPI relative to it. And the higher the KPI, the more impact it's going to have to your revenue cycle, as it deals with these required forms that you cannot bill something for until you get that done. So think through concepts like that if you're not doing it. Incomplete demographic information. This is another thing, especially if you do 911. On the non-emergency side, a lot of this information is captured at CAD or at the dispatch office, but a lot of times on the 911 side, this information isn't captured. It's usually captured in the field. And then that field either uploads, depending upon how you have your APIs integrated. Some people update the CAD system automatically, or they allow the CAD or the EPCR to do it via the billing, however it's imported, whatever, however dynamic you have it set up. But incomplete demographic information is probably the next issue and large issue from returns, bad addresses that are coming back when you're looking at things. And so that all lends into stuff that may be coming back into the billing office because there's incomplete demographic information. And this allows you to say, hey, if we train them, we'd like to see 60% or 70% of the information that comes back, or 80%. What is that number? But you provide that information back. If it comes incomplete, this is easy stuff. It's easy reportable stuff. You may have to do your setup in your EPCR system or your billing system, but this is stuff that I've seen in most of the major EMS billing systems, that you do have the ability to report this, and the billing agencies on what's incomplete, what's not incomplete is great feedback to get back, and you can actually score and say, okay, 80% of our crews are getting accurate demographic information, or 70%, whatever that number is. This can help you, and it can actually improve the collections for your revenue cycle. Pardon me, I'm going to take a
Asbel, while you're taking that quick
Sure.
trip, can I just throw in a comment?
Sure.
And this is mostly aimed to my colleagues in Colorado, but our state is somewhat lucky in having two still functional health information exchanges. On the west side of the state, it's QHN. On the east side, it's Contexture, which used to be Corio. We've been able to connect our billing company to QHN's exchange, and they're able to log in, and essentially what the health information exchanges have done is essentially crowdsource the billing and demographic information. So whatever healthcare practice the patient last showed up in, they've got the most current insurance card and the most current address based on their amalgamation of all the health records. And that's been kind of a windfall for us, because I don't know about the rest of you, but our paramedics can't spell anybody's name right. They can't get anybody's zip code right. Yeah, I mean, it's just one disaster after another, and being able to actually log into the centralized exchange and be able to pull that, and having our billing people able to pull that has been a godsend. That is all. Thank you.
Now that is fantastic, because the HIEs and those that have the availability to that, even at a minimum. And what I'm seeing is you're seeing the more popularity around that. I found it interesting that there is some guidance that has come out on almost that there's a requirement now to actually encourage, they're actually going to start to penalize if providers are not sharing their data. And this is getting at it. And so it's an interesting thing that has come up that has been implemented. The providers actually pushed back against it. They wanted another delay. And from what I read this morning, that delay is not going to happen. A lot of times it was related around, but it's a lot around this HIE side. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more and more of that information. So I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're not exploring that, you should probably begin exploring and looking a bit more into it, because it's going to resolve a lot of these issues for you as well. Not all of them, but it's going to get you there. It's getting it there step by step. But at a minimum, start reporting now. See what that is. What is that accuracy rate on your documentation? Do you know? Are you able to get it? And do you have resources if you don't want to hold the crew responsible for it? Are there resources to get that information to, whether it's through an HIE, whether it's through some other type of exchange that maybe you're working through, or maybe it's through a product where you're scrubbing the information. For instance, that's what we do at Solutions Group. But there's a lot of different companies that do things like that will scrub data and do that for you. You might look at that, because that absolutely will help with your collection rate and increasing your cash, just FYI. Inadequate medical documentation is another issue that you see a lot of, and that usually comes from the billing office. And a lot of times we see it in the form of what we would consider a claim is not being billed because it doesn't meet the prudent layperson's definition of an emergency or the medical necessity, or somebody's downgrading a call. or even upgrading a call because the medical documentation might be inconsistent as well. And so these are areas like, how are you flagging that? How are you monitoring that? Is it going through? If it's going through a QA process, how are you notifying someone else that there's been a QA issue? We found a documentation issue. How do we know that that might not be impacting the billing process because they're billing based upon the medical record and QA identified something that shouldn't have happened? So that is the type of stuff where if you are keying stuff, then you're running reports off of it, and that keeps that in your, so there's not some surprise that all of a sudden you went under audit and then you found out about it, like, well, how did we not know this? Well, you probably weren't measuring it. And that's usually why notifications and surprises happen to a lot of providers when they go under audit. If they uncover something that's like, I didn't realize this was happening, because they weren't measuring it. So these are the different types of things. Of course, you're not going to measure 20 different things for reimbursement to operations. You pick what we always do, pick the top 2 or 3 from a reimbursement side that you're trying to measure, because you guys are already looking at things operationally that have nothing to do with they're all clinical related. And so a lot of times, if you get too many metrics available, what are you trying to move the needle on? Find those 2 to 3 things, move the needle, and then maybe you interchange them, and you're constantly reevaluating, and maybe those 2 or 3 things might be changing every 6 months or every 3 months once you see the improvement happen. Usually it's 6 months, but those are the type of things that you would look at. This is just one of them that we typically anecdotally see as well. The next thing is, and this is a big thing and a lot of questions, some people don't have this issue, but I will tell you more providers have it than actually admit it, and that is missing tickets. Or people not turning their tickets on time. We're seeing a lot more of this as we are facing workforce shortages. Employees are demanding things that we probably thought we would never, ever acquiesce to in the past. And now we're actually making concessions on things that we used to not make concessions on. And one of them is when we're seeing is that a ticket's not been closed out, or they left their shift without completing all their runs. Or something like that. And so how are you identifying that? How are you maintaining and staying on top of it? Yeah, we report on it, Asbel. We send an email. We've got somebody that diligently looks at it, but how's it being reported? Do you know how many tickets are out there that somebody didn't call in that are 2 days old, are 72 hours old? Oh, well, let me go run a report. Well, you're obviously not measuring it if you're having to run a report. This would be something that you should be looking at on a constant, consistent basis. Management should know, because this is just money walking right out the door. It's not just money walking out the door. There's also a compliance issue. You have a risk issue associated with this as well. So these are things that you should be constantly looking at. This is probably the one that I would say most people say, I've got a process in place for this, or they cannot leave their shift without closing their tickets out. Okay, so you do that. They get off the shift late. So I bet $100 if we audited them, what's the quality of their record look like? Do you know how many that I'm going to pick on Matt Zavasky. Matt Zavasky did 10 calls yesterday. If I ran it through the system and he was on a truck, a 12-hour shift, but he was on for 13 hours because he ran all day. And now all of a sudden, 8 out of his 10 tickets didn't meet medical necessity, or 8 out of his 10 tickets didn't have any insurance information. Took us a lot longer to get something done. Or it was a pencil whipped EPCR because he didn't feel like filling it out. It was at the end of his shift. These are things that you begin to see symptoms in paperwork and with people, and you can correlate to shifts as you start measuring it as well. And so this is typically what we will begin to see, but you should at least begin looking at something relative to this. Usually my issue is, and it's wrong, right, or indifferent, it's really hard. Once a ticket gets out 3, 4, 5, and you're recreating tickets after that long, I'm highly suspect that you're going to remember what you are keying in if you didn't key it in before. And so a lot of times, just like with anything else, we understand memory. You can maybe remember some of the parameters around it, trying to build it. You probably should have some processes or procedures in place. If a ticket gets too old, when is that cutoff point for you? And then you kind of work it through that process. Okay, well, I am 15 minutes from ending as well. So I'm going to kind of leave it here and see if there's any questions around report. You guys will have access to this. Kim will send it out. The QR code works, as my team informed me, but it's not the way that I want it done. But if you scroll through and you scan that QR code on the other one, you'll see all my presentations that I'm presenting to you guys today are there. You can download it that way. But I'll also be still sending these as well. And of course, my email is there. If you've got a question, feel free to ask. But hopefully this gave you just a bit of insight into RCM reporting and how you should be looking at it, whether you're an executive in the billing office or from the operational perspective, and how you can impact your revenue cycle.
I got a question, Asbel. Do you happen to have sample reports or something that might be able to provide to Kim so we can try to get an idea of what those reports might look like?
I do. I will give you an example of a few of them. As well, I'll give you an example of a few of what they would look to kind of get your, if you want to kind of get your creative genius going.
Something to kind of, yeah, like you said, just to get something brewing. So I have some idea of what.
I'll send you over an example of one or two of them. The reason why I'm not going to send you over everything is there's people that pay for me to come in and do all that for you, and it would just be disingenuous to give everything that people actually pay for to go through that process. But I'll give you a sample of what one would look like so you can kind of get you going in that direction.
Would 10 cents per report be acceptable?
What was that?
10 cents a report be acceptable?
Oh, a sample.
So she's offering you 10 cents per report.
10 cents. Oh yeah, I'll take a penny. I'll give you a deal, a penny.
Other questions? Looks like they're ready for Miller time here.
I'm telling you. Do you have any more after this, or I'm it for you today?
You are the end of the day.
All
We'll
right.
see you again tomorrow on the No Surprises Act. So
Perfect.
I think we're probably at that point where we can let you go and we'll get these guys out a little bit early.
Perfect, guys. Y'all enjoy your beautiful state. Wish I was there. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I heard Tim's fine the first round.